Let's now go over some example for the second version of the equals method quickly. Okay, and I already finished the line by line explanation for the equals method. You want to review them, and let's now go on to example number 1. Okay, example number 1. Again, remind yourself about the objects over here, and also the overridden version of the equals method, which we just explained line by line. So let me now put this one here. So this is our equals method over here. Okay, so that's the overridden version. And we also have several objects over here, similar to how we did for version 1. And this one here, we got S pointing to the string objects somewhere in the memory, right? So this is going to be string. And then I'm going to use different color to trace the execution path. But I'll also show you one where how we can step into and see the different version of the equals method being called. We'll do that as well on Eclipse. So the string object got value over here, and then we got 2 and 3, right? Okay, like that. Okay, let's now trace, before we do tracing line by line, we also got this part over here. We got P1, P2, P3, the same as before. Let me fill in the value. Okay, 2, 3, 2, 3, and 4, 6, right? P1, P2, P3. So we got 2, 3, we got 2, 3, we got 4, 6 over here. Okay, let's answer the easy one. What if we say P1 equals P2? P2 equals P3, right? That should be easy. P1 equals P2, false. Different objects. P2 equals P3, P2 equals P3 should also be false. Different objects. These two should be easy. What happens if I try to say P1 dot equals P1? Okay, now it's very important to see. Let me now try to use different color here. Okay, let's say the first one. P1 dot equals P1. If we try that, P1 dot equals P1, and which version of the equals method are we going to call? Are we going to call this default version here, or are we going to call the overridden version here? The answer is it depends on what the context object is. Okay, for the very first one, I'm going to write it down. Okay, so for this one over here, for P1, you can see it's pointing to a dynamically it's pointing to this objects over here, right? Dynamic type of context objects is point v2, right? You can see that's how we initialize the objects. Especially you can see P2 is really this is dynamic type, right? So this is the dynamic type of P2, that particular objects. Okay, since the dynamic type for I'm talking about P1, right? Beg your pardon. Let me undo this. Okay, so what I really meant to highlight is this one here. Similar idea. Okay, so this will be the dynamic type of P1 over here. Okay, so since the dynamic type of P1 is point v2, so that means when we try to call P1 dot equals, the dynamic type for the context object is going to determine which version of the equals method will be called at the runtime. Okay, let me write it down. So this means the version of equals in point v2 is called. Right? It's really important for you to see the reasoning. Dynamic type of context object is actually point v2. So that means the version of the equals on from points v2 is actually invoked. Okay, which is exactly this version over here. All right, and let's see what the consequence is. And the execution path will go this way. So let's see here, we're calling this, so when we try to execute the first branch over here, so this will be replaced by P1. And OBJ is going to be replaced by P1 as well. Right? That's the argument. So we are simply just going to return true, and that's it. So that's exactly the execution path for this line over here. So it's just going to be true. And this makes sense because if we compare whether P1 equals itself, it should be the same. It should be true. And that's the reflexivity requirements that we spoke about earlier. Okay. And let me just make another note. This about reflexivity. One of the principles I spoke about for the equals method. All right, let's see the second one. Let me use blue. What if we do P1 that equals null? Okay, again, the context object is all P1, right? You can see that. Let me just use this. You can see the context objects for all of the method call over here is all P1, meaning that the dynamic type is simply just the point V2 over here. So it's always going to invoke this particular equals method, right? That's the context objects over here. So we're still going to actually go into this equals method here, and then context object is still going to be P1. Okay, it's still going to be P1. And what about null? Null is going to be this. Okay, P1 equals null is going to be false. So which means we're gonna bypass over here, right? It's false. And then we're gonna go into this particular branch. And what about null? So obj is actually null. Null equals null is going to be true. So we're going to execute the body of the if. So it's going to be return false, right? So and that's it for this method. So that's why it will just be false. All right. Hopefully so far you're fine. Let's go for the next one. Okay. What if I say P1 dot equals S over here? So the context object is still just P1. And the argument is actually S, right? Let's try to see. And we are still going to execute this version over here. And for the first one, if we still got P1, right? What about OBJ? OBJ will be replaced by S. P1 equals S. Are they pointing to the same objects? P1 pointing to here, S pointing to here. They are not pointing to the same objects. So that means we're going to bypass, again, the body of the loop. The body of the if statements. Okay, we don't execute this. What about the second line over here? So OBJ is actually S, right? So S equals null. Is that true? S equals null. That's not true because it's really pointing to some string objects. So it's also going to bypass returning false. And then we're gonna do this check over here. This get class. What's this? P1, the context objects. P1.get class is going to give you this. Right? You can think about this is P1.get class. Whereas OBJ, which is S.get class is going to give you this. So this is going to be S.get class. Are they the same? Apparently not. So that means not equal to is going to be true. So that means we're going to execute this, return false, right? And that's it. So it's going to be false. All right, hopefully so far you're okay. I'm trying to go very slowly, really line by line. Hopefully you're following. And let's try this. What if we try the next one? Let's use purple. Let's say we do P1 dot equals P2 over here. Let me go a little bit faster on this. We're still going to do the previous three checks, right? P1 and P2, right? So first of all, P1 equals P2. We know that it's false. P1, P2, pointing to different objects, so we know that it's going to be false. So we're not going to execute this part here. And what about P2? The arguments, P2 equals null. Is that true? That's not true, right? Because P2 is indeed pointing to some objects over here. So it is not going to return false. So this is also not going to be returning. And what about this? P1.get class and also P2.get class. What's P2.get class? P2.get class is going to be pointing to the point v2 objects, right? So this is P2.get class, the arguments. Are they the same? Indeed, they are the same. If they're the same, you can see not equal to is going to be false. So we're also going to bypass this one here. We're not going to return false like the earlier assertion, like earlier equality comparison. So that means we're going to actually do this one here. We're going to create an alias. Again, it's a typo. It should be point v2 over here. And we're going to create this other. Okay, so we're going to have other over here. And then it's going to be an alias to p2, right? p2 is actually the obj, right? Over here. Static type is objects, right? Just make a notes. Static type is objects in that method invocation. And for other, once you cast it, it's going to be of static type point v2. Static type is going to be point v2. So that's why you can actually do the comparison now. If you say this dot x equals other dot x, let's try that. If you try to see this, so this is actually this dot x, other dot x, this is actually p1. p1 dot x is here, other dot x is 2 over here, and p1 this dot y, which will be p1 dot y over here, other dot y is going to be other here, and then dot y is going to be 3. So they are the same. So that's why this one here is going to return true, right? That one is actually easy to see. What about p2 that equals p3? The idea will be very similar. So this one I can go a little bit more quickly. If I try to say, let me use a red, p2 that equals p3 over here. So p2 that equals p3. Okay. The situation will be very similar to p1 that equals p2 as we just saw. So we are still going to bypass. We're going to bypass this, bypass this, bypass this. And again, we're going to do the cast. And once we do the cast, what we're going to have is p3 and also other. So this will be the other, right? Since we are doing p2 that equals p3, right? So p3 is the obj, right? That's the obj. Okay, obj. Yeah, when I actually talked about p2 earlier, I really meant the obj. Okay, just to remind you over here. Okay, so now we created an alias from the cast. So now if we try to compare p2 and p3, so p2 and p3, are they of the same contents, right? If you try to say this dot x, which will be p2 dot x, right? This will be p2, and the other will be p3, right? Whatever p3 is pointing to, right? So if you compare them, 2 versus 4 and 3 versus 6, they are not the same. So it's going to be false. Okay, it's quite a bit of tracing over here, but you can see it's a different kind of tracing as we did before. So you really want to make sure you understand every point of execution I'm trying to trace over here. Okay, let me try to run one more thing on Eclipse for you. Okay, if you go back to version number 2 over here and go back to point tester, right? Let me remove the breakpoint over here. Okay. All I want to do is I want to put a breakpoint in line number 43. So now we do p3 that equals p4. So p3 is of type point v2, right? Its dynamic type will be, as we see the new keyword, is going to be point v2. So when I say that equals, if I step into, what am I going to see the version? Am I going to see the equals in the object class, or am I going to see the equals in the point v2 class? The answer is the point v2 class. Okay, let's double check. Let me launch the debugger and then switch over here. Okay, if I say step into, that's the only thing I want to show to you. The rest you can definitely check on your own. If I say step into over here, you can see now, rather than in the object class, I'm now in the point v2 class, and it's in its equals method. That's exactly how I trace it line by line in the iPad over here. Okay, and you can simply just go over branch by branch, and then to make sure it's consistent with the paper. I'll leave that to you. Okay, it's really important for you to do that exercise on your own. Okay, so that's about the first example I want to highlight to you about version number 2.